Hello, this is attorney Michael Monheit, and I'm here in Philadelphia, and I'm going to bring you up to date on litigation that's recently been filed in the Superior Court in the state of California in the county of San Francisco. Litigation that was filed this April 2019 against a manufacturer and developer and seller of a product. The company is Gilead Sciences, and the medication is an HIV medication that was sold under the brand names of Viread, Truvada, Atripla, Stribild, and Complera. The case is pretty straightforward. As alleged in the complaint filed in California State Court, it's a case of corporate greed involving the decision of a pharmaceutical company to withhold for more than 1 decade a prodrug for the treatment of HIV that it knew was safer and more effective than the prodrug it had already put into the market. Now, these are serious allegations filed in this complaint. Gilead Sciences Incorporated is a California pharmaceutical giant. Gilead acquired the rights to a drug called tenofovir, Tenofovir, in the mid-1990s, and it secured exclusive rights to license, synthesize, and create tenofovir-based compounds. So what happened? Beginning in 2001, Gilead manufactured and sold prodrug forms of tenofovir called TDF. At the same time, it had developed another prodrug in another form of tenofovir that it called TAF, which it knew to be less toxic to the kidneys and the bones. The medications that were developed by Gilead were sold under the brand names Viread, Truvada, Atripla, Stribild, and Complera. Data submitted in 2000 by the company in a patent application before TDF was even approved revealed that Gilead knew TAF was substantially less toxic than TAF. Yet Gilead shelved the TAF project in 2004, and it's alleged this was done to maximize profits on the existing TDF patent. Gilead entered a marketplace to the exclusion of all others, leaving patients with no choice in an already desperate situation. And under these circumstances, the plaintiffs allege that Gilead owed the safest possible drug. But 10 years later, in 2014, as the TDF patent came to a close, only then did Gilead apply strategically for FDA approval of TAF. And in November of 2015, it brought it to market for the very first time. So when Gilead introduced TAF to physicians in 2015, it touted TAF as a new and novel prodrug formulation that was much safer for patients. But there was nothing new about it. Make no mistake, it was the same drug that it kept on the shelf in development since at least 2000. And as a result, it's alleged that hundreds of thousands of HIV-infected patients taking the drug prophylactically, they were exposed to a more toxic form of the drug for over a decade. These patients, including the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, unwittingly and needlessly suffered permanent, debilitating, and sometimes fatal kidney damage and bone damage. Now, what's the history of these medications? Gilead's drugs were developed from around 1990 to 2012, and throughout the development of these TDF drugs, Gilead knew that tenofovir, in the prodrug form of TDF, was extremely toxic to patients' kidneys, bones, and teeth. At the same time as it developed TDF, Gilead had investigated, discovered, and researched and developed a safer, more effective tenofovir prodrug called tenofovir alafenamide fumarate, TAF. And that TAF formula reduced human toxicity and the risk of resulting injury to the kidneys and bones. However, despite having already developed a safer form of tenofovir, Gilead, as is alleged in these complaints, intentionally, knowingly, willfully, recklessly, carelessly marketed the TDF-based medication Viread and withheld the safer TAF-based formulations from the market until November of 2015, resulting in injuries to the plaintiffs and to other patients. And in so doing, Gilead was able to maximize its profits and fully exploit its patents on its TDF-based medications. These allegations are just the latest in an assault that the HIV/AIDS community has suffered. The HIV community has been neglected, marginalized, stigmatized, and discriminated against ever since the disease first entered the public lexicon in 1981, when it was interchangeably referred to as gay-related immune deficiency, gay man's pneumonia, and gay cancer. For example, even though the Center for Disease Control estimated in 1982 that tens of thousands of people were already affected by the disease, and anywhere from 854 to 2,304 deaths had been attributed to AIDS between 1982 and 1983, initial efforts to allocate funding for AIDS research were mocked at the highest levels of government, when then Press Secretary Larry Speakes going so far as calling the epidemic the gay plague during a press briefing. And after a long delay, it was not until 1984 that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services announced that researchers at the National Cancer Institute had found the cause of AIDS, a retrovirus they initially labeled HTLV3, before later being renamed HIV-1. During this time, the CDC estimated that 50,280 people were infected with HIV/AIDS, of which 47,993, that's 95.5%, died of complications related to the disease, prompting a segment of the general public to support the quarantining of infected people and the U.S. government to ban travel and immigration by members of the HIV/AIDS community. The pharmaceutical industry's neglect of the HIV/AIDS community came to a head in October of 1988, when over 1,000 members and supporters of the activist group ACT UP engaged in a massive sit-ins that shut down the FDA offices to protest the slow pace of new HIV/AIDS drugs being brought to market. In 1989, members and allies of the HIV/AIDS community rallied against the overall lack of treatment options and the astronomical prices of the few available medications, culminating in a series of FDA reforms aiming at expanding the clinical trials and increasing access to therapeutic treatments. It was in the midst of this tumult that the ostracization and fear in the AIDS community, the HIV community, that Gilead first assumed its investigation and development of a prodrug form of tenofovir, which could be offered as an alternative course of treatment for the virus, ultimately resulting in Gilead securing exclusive license to synthesize tenofovir-based compounds. In working to identify and design a viable delivery mechanism for tenofovir, Gilead first considered whether it could be developed and marketed as an intravenous formulation, but ultimately they scrapped the concept when initial testing revealed that the intravenous administration of tenofovir caused a rapid and severe decline in kidney function. As a result, Gilead moved to consider oral formulations of tenofovir, ultimately synthesizing both TDF and TAF simultaneously in 1993. And by 1998, it had concluded initial preclinical studies in animal testing that revealed their relative potency, efficacy, and cytotoxicity. With respect to TDF, Gilead learned that although the human body converts the compound into tenofovir following oral ingestion, the amount of active tenofovir actually absorbed into the bloodstream was disproportionately low compared to the dose of the TDF that had been administered. In order to address TDF's low bioavailability, the amount of drug actually absorbed into the bloodstream, Gilead determined that a 300 milligram dose was the lowest amount of TDF that could be effectively administered to achieve the desired inhibition of the HIV virus replication. Gilead scientists also determined that this minimum effective dose of TDF resulted in abnormally high concentrations of active tenofovir in the kidneys, which inhibit the kidney's overall ability to properly function and contribute to mineral losses that precede bone and tooth loss. At the same time it reached these conclusions regarding TDF, Gilead also determined that TAF was a more viable prodrug form of tenofovir that could be administered orally to introduce the same amount of active tenofovir into the body at 1/10 of the dose of TDF and achieve the same antiretroviral effectiveness as TDF at only 1/1000th of the dose. Said another way, Gilead found that because of the differences in bioavailability between TDF and TAF, patients needed approximately 12 times more TDF, the 300 milligram dose, than TAF at a 25 milligram dose in order to achieve the same therapeutic effect on viral replication. Said another way, essentially Gilead knew that the TAF product was safer and more effective than the TDF product. And they knew this at all times relevant to the development and research of the tenofovir product forms. So with this significant knowledge of TDF and TAF and the differences between them, as well as having the exclusive rights to the tenofovir medication formulation, Gilead moved from developing and studying these antiretroviral compounds to the monetization of the medications that would be prescribed to patients with HIV and AIDS. So with this knowledge, in order to maximize its profits and stranglehold on tenofovir-based antiretroviral medications, the complaints allege that Gilead intentionally, knowingly, willfully, recklessly, carelessly devised a marketing scheme where it abandoned the immediate approval, manufacture, and sale of TAF in favor of the less effective, less safe TDF. Gilead knew that selling its safer TAF compound first would result in TDF never being sold. Conversely, by selling TDF-based drugs first, Gilead could reap the profits twice, based first on the TDF sales and then later marketing the safer TAF compound, effectively substantially increasing billions of dollars of profits at the cost of people getting harmed. So while the Gilead scientists were publishing research regarding TAF's superior safety profile, Gilead began the process of bringing the less effective, less safe TDF to market by conducting clinical trials and in 2001 submitting its first formulation, Viread, to the FDA for accelerated approval. According to the plaintiff's allegations, Gilead's intentional, knowing, willful, reckless, and careless promotion of the less effective and less safe TDF product over TAF allowed Gilead to artificially extend the period during which it could exclusively manufacture and sell tenofovir-based drugs for use in preventing and treating HIV, and all this at the expense of the long-term safety and health of its consumers, of the patients who undertook an obligation to treat. Thus, by betraying the trust and compromising the well-being of its customers, Gilead was unapologetic about this marketing and distribution scheme, promoting TDF as a miracle drug in public while knowing full well that it was concealing the existence and availability of a safer and more effective medication, TAF. Worse yet, according to the allegations, Gilead furthered this concealment by intentionally, knowingly, willfully, recklessly, and carelessly characterizing TDF as a benign, non-toxic treatment for HIV in the face of evidence that TAF was safer and more effective. Between 2001 and 2015, Gilead brought 5 different TDF-based medications to market. Viread in 2001, Truvada in 2004, Atripla in 2006, Complera in 2011, Stribild in 2012. All of these while they knew that TAF-based drugs would be safer. Throughout this 14-year period, Gilead's TDF-based medications would sell for anywhere between $1,600 and $2,000 for a 1-month supply, thereby allowing Gilead to profit from an already marginalized HIV/AIDS community in excess of $36 billion, with little or no regard for patient health, safety, and overall quality of life, according to the allegations. Gilead's scheme to promote its less effective, less safe TDF in order to maximize long-term market dominance and financial gain was cemented on October 26, 2001, when it obtained FDA approval for Viread, which at all relevant times consisted of only a 300 milligram dose of TDF in tablet form. According to the complaint, Gilead artificially extended its dominance over the market for tenofovir-based antiretroviral medications, and this was drawing to an end as the patent on its first TDF-based medication, Viread, was set to expire in 2017. Reflecting the monumental financial success it built via TDF-based medications over the course of 14 years, culminating in 2015, that year alone, $11 billion in sales. Gilead then transitioned to implement the current phase of its decades-long plan to continue monopolizing tenofovir into the foreseeable future. They did this by then introducing TAF-based products to market. For example, even though Gilead had publicly stated up to this point that it had abandoned the development of TAF because of its similar safety profile compared to TDF, in reality, Gilead worked internally since 2004 to obtain no less than 7 patents related to the use of TAF in preventing and treating HIV. These same internal efforts were relayed to investors as early as October of 2010, when Gilead's chief scientific officer, Norbert Bischofberger, explained during an earnings call how TAF's safety profile is superior to TDF, particularly with respect to kidney and bone toxicity. According to the complaint, this scheme was shared with Gilead investors again by then President and Chief Operational Officer John Milligan on March 2, 2011, at the Capital Markets Healthcare Conference, where he stated that one of the reasons why Gilead was concerned about developing TAF was Gilead was trying to launch Truvada, and to have its own study suggesting that Viread wasn't the safest thing on the market didn't seem like the best. There are some concerns still on kidney toxicity, and there are some concerns about bone toxicity. And later that month, at Roth Capital Partners' Growth Stock Conference, Mr. Milligan called TAF a kinder, gentler version of Viread because it was safer than TDF, particularly as patients take the medication over extended periods. It's not surprising that Gilead's characterization of TAF as a better option, allowing for lower systemic tenofovir exposure, lower renal toxicity, and better results with bone effects without sacrificing efficacy when compared to TDF, formed the heart of its application to the FDA. What's shocking, however, was that Gilead's bold reliance on TAF data that was obtained before 2005, showing that TAF provided greater intracellular distribution of tenofovir while yielding lower plasma tenofovir levels than TDF. What we learned from the complaint, and it's not surprising, is that Gilead characterized TAF as a better option, allowing for lower tenofovir exposure and less toxicity on the bones and on the kidneys, especially when you compare it to TDF. And they put this in the heart of its application to the FDA for approval of its first TAF-based medication, Genvoya. What's shocking, however, is that Gilead boldly relied on the TAF data that it obtained before 2005, showing that TAF was better than TDF before 2005. Ironically, Gilead's marketing since the approval of TAF in 2015 has focused on extolling the virtues of TAF as the safest, most effective option for the prevention and/or treatment of the HIV-1 virus, all the while profiting from a history of elevating its bottom line over the health and safety of its most marginalized patients. Gilead misrepresented that TAF was new despite knowing the relative benefits and safety compared to TDF long before Gilead brought any TDF-based drugs to market in 2001. Gilead misrepresented the reasons that it had abandoned the development of TAF in 2004, asserting that TAF could not be differentiated from TDF when it knew, in fact, that TAF was effective, in fact, more effective, and safe, in fact, more safe than TDF. For many years, Gilead concealed that it had abandoned TAF in 2004 in order to extend the life cycle of its less effective, less safe TDF-based product portfolio, despite knowing that patients were experiencing TDF-induced kidney and bone injuries. Gilead concealed the true risk of kidney and bone injuries associated with TDF, as well as the need to monitor all patients for TDF-associated toxicity and complications.